Hello, everyone. I'm Augie Napoli, President and CEO of the United Way of Greater Cleveland.
I'm Danielle Sidnor, President of the Cleveland branch of the NAACP. Together, we are honored to present to the community this series of community conversations on the Cleveland Consent Decree. Each session will focus on an area of the consent decree and police reform through a conversation among experts and community leaders to provide insight and to re-engage the community.
The objective of these conversations is to provide a forum to raise awareness and increase community engagement on the consent decree and how it affects members of our community. United Way's mission is being a voice for those in need. We know that there are so many underlying aspects of poverty which are hard to see and equally hard to discuss and solve. And certainly systemic racism is a main contributor to generational poverty that has afflicted our community for far too long. Not one organization can solve inequity, and I am humbled to be only a small part of a group of esteemed community leaders from whom you will have the privilege to hear in this series.
For 108 years, the Cleveland branch of the NAACP has worked to improve the political, educational, social, and economic status of minority groups, to eliminate racial prejudice, and to keep the public aware of the adverse effects of racial discrimination, and to take lawful action to secure its elimination. This community conversation and the monthly topics we will address related to the Cleveland Consent Decree are right in line with the work our organization has addressed and championed every day for over a century right here in Cleveland. Through this series, you will hear about the current status of the Cleveland Consent Decree and the future of policing in the city. And as the name of this event suggests, this is a two-way dialogue, and we want to hear from you tonight and every month in this series as we tackle these various topics.
I'd like to thank Cuyahoga Community College and Rockwell Automation for sponsoring and making this series possible. I would also like to thank the City Club of Cleveland for partnering with us in hosting the series of events, and WOVU for simulcasting this evening's discussion live on 95.9 FM. We'd also like to thank all of our community partners.
Good evening. Tonight's topic is crisis intervention and officer wellness. The Cleveland Consent Decree mandated that the Cleveland Division of Police build upon and improve its crisis intervention program. The Crisis Intervention Program is a first responder model of police-based crisis intervention that involves a dynamic collaboration of community, healthcare, and advocacy partnerships committed to improving the way law enforcement and the community respond to individuals in crisis. Our law enforcement and the community, our panel will discuss what efforts can reduce the risk of serious injury or death during an emergency interaction between police officers and persons experiencing a mental health crisis. In addition, we will explore the physical rigors and stresses associated with criminal justice work and how this can result in police officers facing a variety of health issues throughout their careers. Unaddressed physical and mental health issues can take a toll on officers both on and off duty. It is therefore essential that law enforcement agencies continually promote programming for officer wellness. Tonight's moderator is Harry Boomer, anchor and senior reporter at Channel 19 News. Harry is also the executive producer and host of CW 43 Focus, a public affairs program covering community issues. He's an award-winning journalist with 40 years of news experience. Harry was inducted into the Cleveland Journalism Hall of Fame in 2018. I am honored to introduce tonight's conversation moderator, my friend, Harry Boomer.
Danielle, thank you so very much. And Augie, thank you as well for the introduction, for the opportunity to be a part of this discussion. It is an important discussion. Lives hang in the balance, and we need to make sure that everybody understands exactly what is going on insofar as this consent decree is concerned. Thank you to the United Way of Greater Cleveland and the Cleveland branch of the NAACP for inviting me to moderate this panel discussion. And thank you to the City Club of Cleveland for hosting this series of events, and WOVU for simulcasting this evening's discussion live on 95.5 FM. WOIO Channel 19 is also streaming this discussion live on cleveland19.com. I have a little association with that organization, 31 years and counting there, and I'm glad to be there and glad to be here now. So that everyone understands how we will interact as a community this evening, I will be moderating a panel of experts and taking pauses for response to questions from you, our Zoom listening and viewing audiences. There will be 2 public question and answer segments where questions from the community will be heard and shared with our panel. You can start asking your general questions at any time during this program. Jot this number down, if you will. You can text your questions to area code 216-307-5632. Again, it is on your screen, 216-307-5632. Right now, general questions as we go along with the discussion, you'll have an opportunity to fine tune your questions, direct them to individuals or to our panel as a whole. We'd appreciate your participation because really it is all about you. We would appreciate if your questions are respectful and help to advance this particular dialogue. Tonight, we are joined by Carol Ballard, Director of Training and Education for the Alcohol, Drug, and Mental Health Services. We call it ADAMS, the Board of Cuyahoga County. Ms. Ballard has been the coordinator and facilitator for crisis intervention team training for the past 18 years, working with law enforcement departments throughout the country. Reverend Dr. Joanza Colvin. Reverend Colvin is the 6th pastor of the historic Olivet Institutional Baptist Church here in Cleveland. As the leader of this 4,000-member congregation, he follows his historic tradition of community builders, preachers, scholars, and social activists as well. Rosie Palfy. Ms. Palfy has been a member of the City of Cleveland Mental Health Response Advisory Committee, that's MRAC, since it was established in 2015. Ms. Palfy serves as a combat correspondent in the Marine Corps. She continues to raise awareness about women veterans. From the Division of Police, Captain James Mcpike. Captain Mcpike is the Crisis Intervention Team Coordinator for the Cleveland Division of Police. He also serves as co-chair of the Training Subcommittee for the City of Cleveland Mental Health Response Advisory Committee. Up next is Deputy Chief Joellen O'Neill. Joellen O'Neill was appointed as the Division Deputy Chief in 2014. O'Neill, who joined the force in 1992, has served in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th districts and serves as the police chief's right hand in administrative matters. From the Cleveland Police Monitoring Team, we have Dr. Randolph DuPont. Dr. DuPont is a nationally recognized expert in the fields of behavioral health, crisis de-escalation systems, and officer wellness programs. He is a professor and clinical psychologist at the University of Memphis School of Urban Affairs and Public Policy. And from the United States Attorney's Office, Bridget Brennan. Ms. Brennan joined the United States Attorney's Office in 2007 and has served as an ethics advisor, chief of the Civil Rights Unit, and chief of the Criminal Division. She received her law degree from Case Western Reserve University School of Law. Our curator tonight is Alicia Ellis. Ms. Ellis is the founder and creator of the multimedia platform Mass Lorraine. She is also the co-founder of the women's empowerment group, Fierce Women on Board. Welcome to everyone, and thank you for taking your time to lend your expertise and your perspectives to tonight's dialogue. Let me just go around the board, if you will, and begin to ask folks about their particular perspectives. Let me go with Joellen O'Neill. Joellen, thank you again for being here. When we talk about this issue, about the consent decree, give us your general thinking about what this means to you and what it also means to the Cleveland Police Department.
Good evening, and thank you for having us here tonight, Mr. Boomer. I've been working on the consent decree since its inception, and it has provided us with the ability to develop new policies and a new way of policing. You know, we do a lot of research across the country to find out what best practices are for all law enforcement, and we try to write those into our policy. We train a lot on the policies, and some of the topics we actually address are bias-free policing, crisis intervention, search and seizure, use of force. So our officers are receiving, you know, every year training built upon the prior year about these best practices that we have researched from across the country, and some of the items that we have actually thought of ourselves. I do see our officers turning around, and you know, they actually embrace the new policies, they understand them, and they ask a lot of questions. If they don't, you know, if there's a particular topic they're struggling with, we readdress it with them. We do retraining, but I think that, you know, moving forward in the consent decree, it's definitely making us better police officers. You're on mute, sir.
And I knew better than that. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I have to tell other people this every day, and here I am not doing it. But thank you, Joellen. I really appreciate it. Dr. Colvin, let's go to you and talk to you from your perspective as being a community leader, being involved in this, seeing the results of what's happening in Cleveland and around the country, your perspective on crisis intervention.
Well, thank you, Harry, and it's always good to be communicating with you, and thank you for all your service to the Cleveland community and bringing this and so many other issues to the floor. You know, I can't come to this moment of having this conversation with my colleagues and the city of Cleveland without thinking about how far we have come. I remember, because I was involved in the very beginning of the push toward the consent decree, and I cannot help but think about the context of how we came to this moment. As much as we are having a very formal civil conversation, you can't help but think about Timothy Russell and Melissa Williams and that tipping point of that event, which caused a cascade of outrage, anger, fear, in terms of what were we allowing to perpetrate itself as law enforcement in our community, to the extent that which people were frightened about their own police department. I also remember the people that laid down in the middle of the highway, the people that protested and blocked traffic in downtown and on Euclid. And I also remember the tension and the resistance and the silence that existed in our civic community, in our corporate community, because people did not know how to respond, because it wasn't like it is today. This was such a fresh expression of outrage in our community. I remember when we were organizing Greater Cleveland Congregations, our 1,000-person march down Euclid. And I remember how we were organizing that to continue to put pressure on all involved to get the consent decree. I remember getting a call the night before that march from a high-ranking government official asking me not to have the march. I will never forget that. You see, when you do this type of work, there has to be, before you get the collaboration, there has to be tension. And it's the tension that creates the environment for more people to be in the room, to be involved, to raise the issue, so we can move toward moments like this, the collaboration. So I will say I am pleased. I am glad that history has caught up with this moment finally, that we're able to sit down as parts of a wider community to have this type of conversation. And we know that still the names of people like Tanisha Anderson, Omar Arrington Bay, who was a member of the Olivet congregation who died in police custody, who himself had a mental health issue. It's that work of people that finally gets formalized eventually into federal mandated consent decrees that brings together people from law enforcement, the federal government, as well as the Justice Department to come together and finalize and move toward transacting real change. But I think we ought never forget how we got here. And it continues to take the vigilance, and it continues to take the agency of people to define and shape the terms of the kind of government and the kind of policing that they want to have in their community for the well-being of everyone.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that, Reverend Colvin. Let me go to Dr. Randolph DuPont. You are an expert in recognizing de-escalation of crisis and de-escalation processes. Given what you know that has happened in Cleveland and around the country, your prescription, your thoughts on this crisis intervention and how we as a community in coordination with the Cleveland Police Department can bring some sense of hope, as Dr. Colvin has just expressed.
Thank you, Gary. I do appreciate it. And I want to tell you, it's been a real privilege to be able to get to know those people in Cleveland because I've been impressed with the city. It's something that I'm one of the outsiders, and it's been something very impressive to me. I think Reverend Colvin's remark do have a lot of meaning because I think what's happened here is that we've started with a basis of a community connectedness. I've been impressed with the fact that the Cleveland Police Department truly wanted to connect with those in the community and be able to find a common path towards dealing with serious issues around mental illness. So that's been, I think, the first prescription that I think has been the most important one. The cooperation that I've seen between the Adams Board and the community volunteers who give a lot of time of their own to help work with the police department to be able to develop the policies that DC O'Neill mentioned. Those policies have been, I think, very important. They've already had their influence in a way that we're very pleased with when we look at the outcome data that's starting to come now from the various information systems that have been developed by the police department. So it's a very positive time. What I also like, and I want to emphasize this about Cleveland, is the way that they're doing this on multiple levels. It's not just one way. What they're doing is a number of different ways. They've been funding developed for multiple types of programs that involve social workers, and so programs that involve providers themselves, programs that involve the community in a pretty impressive way, and that work well with the police, and the police are supporting that. And they're taking that beyond that. What's happening now is that I'm finding that the police department and the Adams Board and MRAC, our community-based organization, is now looking at innovative ways of trying to extend this even further and go beyond the consent decree to make things happen that I think will pay great dividends for the citizens of Cleveland. So I do want to thank all the people who have given a lot of time. And I do think that it's very impressive that the way that they have worked and tried to make something better for the city.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much. Since the police is the focal point of this conversation and of the consent decree, let me go next to Captain James Mcpike. He is the Crisis Intervention Team Coordinator for the Cleveland Division of Police. And Captain Mcpike, talk to us from your perspective what all of this crisis intervention means and what you would like to see come out of this discussion today and the overall consent decree discussion that has been going on for 5 years now.
Thank you, Harry. Appreciate it. And thank you, United Way and the NAACP for having us here tonight. I really appreciate being part of this discussion. So for most of my career, I believe one of my purposes was how do we deliver a better service to the citizens of Cleveland? And everyone knows we went under a consent decree in 2015, and the CIT policies, the CIT response was completely changed. We came up with new policies, new procedures, new ways of interacting with our community. And I've really appreciated it. CIT is very new for me. Most of my experience within the Division of Police is in intimate partner violence, such as sexual assault and domestic violence. And I came on board almost March of last year, right when COVID shutdown was getting ready to start. But I've so appreciated the people I've got to work with, such as Carol Ballard at the Adams Board and Dr. DuPont at the University of Memphis down in Tennessee, because I've learned so much from them about CIT and what it means. I'm really hopeful for CIT. The Cleveland Division of Police handles about 4,000 CIT incidents a year. I'm proud to say we handle them very well. But over the last 5 years, our officers have received extensive training on de-escalation techniques and interacting with people in crisis. And we've revamped our program for crisis intervention team officers. We kicked off our brand new training program last October in the middle of COVID. We started a co-responder program last December. We now have in every district a zone car working that is staffed with a police officer and a social worker, providing follow-up to a person in crisis that our officers encountered usually 2-3 days before. And that wasn't being done before. So now we have a team going out and checking in on these people that experience some sort of crisis and making sure they're getting the resources they need, connecting them to services as needed. And additionally, we're going to start taking a look at a non-police response to people in crisis this year. Harry, you heard them mention MRAC, the Mental Health Response Advisory Committee. So that was formed under consent decree. It started off as a collaboration between the Adams Board and the Division of Police. And it really grew into this wonderful collaboration where we have multiple service providers throughout the city of Cleveland, throughout the area that are part of MRAC, that are on the boards, that are associated with MRAC, and they really help the Division of Police make decisions and come up with better ways of providing a service to our community and to our citizens. And that's one of the things that we're putting in the pipeline, so to speak, this year is what does it look like in Cleveland to have a non-police response to people in crisis? It's done pretty well in other communities throughout the country. But as we know, Cleveland is unique, so we have to see how that's going to work here. And I'm confident we're gonna come up with something this year.
Excellent. Thank you, Captain, very much. I appreciate that. Carol Ballard, your name was invoked a couple of times, so we'll go to you next. We appreciate your being a part of this conversation. Just in case you don't remember, we did introduce her. She's the Director of Training and Education for the Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board of Cuyahoga County. It is commonly called ADAMS. Ms. Ballard, your thinking, please.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate the work of United Way and the NAACP for putting this conversation together. The Adams Board has been involved with the Division of Police since 2004 related to the coordination of the Crisis Intervention Team program. And in 2004, it was probably seen more as training. And in 2021, we view it more as the program in its original form. So I believe that the consent decree has enabled a greater level of transparency between the community, between our providers, between the police department, and our stakeholders at large. I also believe that it kind of helped us in behavioral health look at our role in it, because every great CIT program is solely dependent upon what resources are available to our officers and to our residents in the city. And the Adams Board has stepped up steadily to this issue. And it also has helped our community have community dialogue about something that they all want. And I love the overview that Reverend Colvin gave, because during that time period, we were doing CIT training, and the expression and conversation within CIT training on the events that were transpiring were invaluable. And I still remember some of those comments from some of the officers that were in those classes at that time. It was hard for them to see it at a different level because it was like watching a movie. But looking and talking with those officers today, you know, Captain Mcpike talked about the CIT training in 2020. We got officers that can quote their policies And they did that in the training. We got officers that got great stories of how our system is now looking at their response. We had great stories of perseverance. We had so much dialogue and excitement around what else can we learn because we want to do this better. So I think it's a great story. And it came with difficult circumstances, but there is something around the corner for Cleveland because Cleveland is going to the top. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ballard. Rosie Palfy, thank you very much for being a part of this, part of the City of Cleveland's Mental Health Response Advisory Committee, MRAC. We mentioned that a couple of times. Your thinking on where this consent decree is right now and what role the city is playing outside of the Division of Police.
Hi, thank you. I apologize. I was having technical difficulty. I missed the last part of your question.
Just in terms of what the role of your role is, and also with the outside of the Division of Police, the role the city is playing in responding to the mental health crisis intervention team, and dealing with folk.
So we have two police officers, Captain Mcpike and Sergeant Bridget Dorgeiser, who's the liaison to the Crisis Intervention Training Coordinator, and they make a great team. They're doing a really good job. But unfortunately, the Alcohol, Drug, Mental Health Board of Cuyahoga County is doing a lot of the work as far as organizing meetings and everything like that, due to a memorandum of understanding that they signed about 2 weeks before the monitoring team was chosen. So one of my issues is that I think that the city should be running this committee. This is supposed to be their committee. So that's one of my concerns. Another concern is that the division needs to train about 200 officers in 40 hours of specialized crisis intervention training. And so far, only 19 officers have been trained because they're not volunteering for it for a variety of reasons. So that's a big concern. The other thing is, during the intro, somebody talked about making these encounters safer. And we're really not talking about individual use of force cases. The number of times use of force is used is very low. The police officers are doing a great job with that. But, you know, we need to talk about whenever a taser is used or anything like that. So that's a concern that we're not really addressing.
All right, well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Let me also go on to the next panelist, and that is to ask those of you who have questions to text them to area code 216-307-5632. Again, 216-307-5632. Text your questions. We'll try and get them to our panelists as soon as we get them and can go through them, and to make sure there are no duplications. Thank you. Bridget Brennan, thank you very much. She's from the United States Attorney's Office, and we appreciate the fact that you are part of this discussion as well. Your overall thinking about this crisis intervention and officer wellness concept that we're discussing today, so the community can have a better understanding of exactly what is at stake and what is happening.
Thank you very much for inviting us to participate. I'm really happy to join this particular conversation. I think what our folks have heard so far is that there are a lot of people invested in crisis intervention in Cleveland, a lot of experience, a lot of perspectives. And through the Mental Health Response Advisory Committee, the MRAC, all these voices are coming together and they're being heard with the goal to make sure that, you know, we are engaged as a city in constitutional policing as it relates to those in crisis. And what that means really is public officials, public servants, and police officers in this instance need to meet people where they are, not where they think people should be, not what they expect people should be doing, but where they are in a moment. And through the training that's been happening with Cleveland Division of Police and in collaboration with the Adams Board, there's real communication happening about how to address folks who are experiencing a crisis, who have experienced a trauma, you know, one-on-one, face-to-face interaction. It's really been, it's been phenomenal to watch the training take place. And when we get to, I think, some of the results and how we can already show that this process is really working in Cleveland, de-escalation has really risen as a response. And there are far, far fewer instances where the police response to those in crisis involves arrest. So we really are successfully moving the needle and informing police officers and moving towards a model that treats the person where they are. And that's a real improvement for Cleveland, and they should be commended. And the monitoring team, Dr. DuPont and Carol, I mean, the work that's gone into this collaboration is really phenomenal.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. You know, I had a conversation some years ago with a now former, I guess it must have been the president of one of the police unions, the CPPA. And he said to me, Boomer, we've done a good job in training police to use their outside voices. We've not done a good job in helping them understand why it's important to use their inside voices, de-escalation, talking to people, giving folk the response. What I'm hearing from this conversation so far this evening is that Cleveland has made major strides in helping police and citizens understand how important de-escalation is, and how if we continue that, there's going to be a much better communication and relationship between the police department and the community. When I grew up, they always used to ask little boys, what do you want to be? And they always said, I want to be a police officer and a firefighter. And I said to someone not so long ago, there are communities in which police officers are seen as officer friendly, and there are communities where they're seen as officer mean. And what I'd like to get here from folk is how we bridge and close that gap between mean and friendly, so that more people, when young Black men, for example, see a police officer, they won't run. Reverend Colvin, if I could get you to respond to that, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. You know, it's very interesting. When you were making that, making your statement, I was thinking about a response. And I think that, how is trust built in a relationship? Through consistency. Trust is built through consistency. When there's inconsistent action, people cannot trust your actions. And so I think it is very important, as Ms. Ballard has pointed out, as well as Officer O'Neill and Officer Mcpike has pointed out, it is so important that we do have a process, we have plans, and we have training. But what is so important is the consistency. And as Ms. Palfrey pointed out, we've got to make sure that as many officers are trained, that when these encounters take place, because every encounter that an officer might have with a person who's in mental health crisis may not have begun like that. There might not have been a call saying someone is in mental health crisis. It might not be until they're at the scene and through observation are coming to that conclusion. And then that training, that inner voice that you mentioned, then takes on a stronger role. So I think we've got to make sure that is consistent. That's how trust is built. I think the other thing that we've got to have is imagination. That's not something we think about when we think about in law enforcement or when we think about in government. Imagination. We've got to imagine doing police differently, moving from paramilitary training to, as Ms. Brennan talked about, infusing and integrating and putting into the bloodstream de-escalation. We've got to imagine, we've got to be able to imagine going a year like they just did in Newark, what is called the Newark Miracle, where not one bullet was fired in an entire year. They are also under consent decree. So I think for us, it does take all of the technical skills that is present on this panel. It takes all of the commitment that is demonstrated by the professional lives that people have dedicated to doing this work, both in the community, within the police department, within the mental health and substance abuse community. But it also takes imagination, because when you can imagine and believe that things can be different, it releases your creative powers to begin to think about how we can do things different.
Thank you, sir. And as you were talking, I recall thinking when I visit the Justice Center, which I often do as a reporter, right across from the Justice Center is the Peace Officers Memorial, where fallen police officers who gave their last full measure are honored. And I thought some years ago, what a difference it would make if we thought about peace officer versus police officer. Those are two different ways of thinking when it comes to dealing with serving and protecting the public. Peace officer, understand what that means? And police officer. Dr. DuPont, if you could talk from that, because you are very much steeped in behavioral health and crisis de-escalation, talk from that vantage point about what those two concepts mean, because they're not one and the same in my mind, if you would, sir.
Yeah, I think that you're touching on something that's becoming a central theme, which is that the reminder that most police go into this work to take care of people. And in some sense, we could argue that the guardian mentality is what they're really seeking and what they really are about. And my experience is that if we can set up a system that allows officers to kind of recapture that idealism, they will do so, because it's deep inside them, and it's why they really went into policing in the first place. And I do think we're seeing that here. What I'm seeing is officers who are really capturing that idealism, the idea of that they're in to serve, they're caring for others, and we're tapping into that and giving them a chance to get the recognition they deserve, and to giving them a chance to kind of show leadership. One thing that's important to understand about what the consent decree brings is a strategy that allows the officers who have that mentality, who understand, as you point out, the idea that they're a peace officer and they're a guardian, as well as those that are also taking care of other issues that need to be taken care of, but that those officers that understand that get to have leadership in a crisis event and be able to direct it and make sure that they are personally responsible for the outcome. I do think that that's happening, and I think it's an important concept that I see people accepting. I've heard it indeed from DC O'Neill. I've heard it as well from Captain Mcpike and others that I've worked with, and I think we're seeing it in practice. It's not just in words; it's really happening.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the two you just mentioned, to DC O'Neill, and talk with her about this, as well as Captain Mcpike, since the police are central in this conversation. DC Deputy Chief Joellen O'Neill, you're thinking on the concepts of peace officers versus police officer, and what that portends for the citizens, and what any changes that need to be made that the police department is aware of at this point and moving toward.
Okay, no, you didn't tell me to unmute, Harry.
Okay, sorry.
So we, the Division of Police, we actually changed our mission up. We actually use the term guardian in our mission now. Our job is to assist people, and we would prefer to assist people in definitely a more peaceful manner. We never had the word warrior in our mission before, but I think over the years that police took on a different function, and I don't know how to describe it, but there are times when we do actually have to be a warrior, but we prefer to be guardians. We prefer to be peacekeepers. We are called to people's houses, as Reverend Colvin said. Sometimes we get called to people's houses that are not a call for a mental health issue, but then we are trained up enough now to realize the differences, and we can change our approach, de-escalate how we have to based on that person's mental health issues. And we actually realize what those are now. So I think that allows us to be more of a peace officer or a peacekeeper than a police officer.
Thank you for that. And Captain McPike, go ahead.
Harry, I would invite you to come and join the police department if you wanted to be a police officer since you were a small child.
My brother was one for 27 years in DC, and I appreciate his service and the service of other police officers in Cleveland around the country. But thank you for the invitation. But I'm old and kind of old, and I don't know if I have the physical agility to do that anymore. Thank you for the invitation. Captain McPike, one of the things that I found in life is people are often resistant to change. Sometimes even when you move from bad to better, there's institutional change in that process. Talk about that and the crisis intervention team as a crisis intervention team coordinator, about how that impacts on the folk who serve in the CPD and how it then carries over to how they interact with citizens in the city of Cleveland.
I think there are a couple of questions there, but first of all, I just want to go back to Dr. Colvin. I think he really, one, he's speaking for the heart. Two, when he talks about consistency, I think that resonates with me very well. I've been around for 26 years. Most police officers I've known in my career actually care about people, want to help, want to do a good job. But if you have one encounter with a police officer that's a bad encounter, that's very distasteful to that person, and I think it really affects police officers, not just in the city of Cleveland, but nationwide. It kind of stigmatizes us a little bit. So we really have to in his words, we have to strive for consistency, and we do that with really well-written policies that help guide our officers down the proper paths, help them with encounters. We have to provide a lot of training on those policies to ensure that things are done right from the beginning so that we can be as consistent as possible. So Dr. Colvin, thank you for bringing up consistency, because I do agree with you. I think that's really important to police work. With CIT, I'd like to point out that the city of Cleveland actually started CIT training many years ago. And at one point we had over 400 officers trained in CIT. For those who don't know what that is, it's a 40-hour course that teaches officers about mental illnesses, about substance abuse, how to recognize that in somebody they're dealing with, and more importantly too, how to de-escalate, how to talk to that person. In fact, the last day of training, day 5, officers go through lots of scenarios of people in crisis with some really good actors, I want to point out, that challenge them to de-escalate those situations. It's really impressive to see our officers go through that. But to Carol Ballard's point, the thought back then was we just need to train as many officers as possible in CIT without looking at the systemic approach to CIT that needs to occur in the community for it to be the best that it possibly can be. Hence, the revamping of our policies, the revamping of our program, the formation of the Mental Health Response Advisory Committee, and our relationship with the Adams Board and all of our community partners. Because CIT is more than just that 40 hours of training, it's a systemic approach to our community. And how do we, as a police department, get better at that? And I think our program has done really well. I get high regards from Dr. DuPont and his team. And that's not lip service. That man's an expert in this field. So Cleveland's come a long way in the last 5 years in regard to CIT. Yes, we just started the brand new program last year. We're supposed to have 2 classes, but COVID shut us down. We finally got the very first one under the new program off the ground in October. We were capped at 19 officers. We had 19 officers. This year, we had a class scheduled during the same week as the NFL draft, which was here in Cleveland. So we had to cancel that one. But our next one is scheduled in July, and then we have one in October. I have enough people to fill those classes. The volunteering is small. I'm okay with that, because the officers that we're interviewing, my God, their heart and head is in it. In fact, many of the officers have family members and friends with mental illness and substance abuse issues. So they're really coming at it from a very unique perspective. And it's so interesting to see our officers get involved with that. So I'm actually very hopeful. It's going to take, just so you know, the goal is to get about 25% to 30% of patrol officers trained on CIT. And I think it's going to take us for sure a few years to get there, but we'll definitely get there. I'm excited about the process.
Thank you for that. Now, there are nearly 100 people participating in this that you don't see who are watching, listening, responding. And I'd like to invite them again to respond by text. Their questions to the panel. And that number is 216-307-5632. Again, 216 is on your screen now for those of you are joining us via the internet, 216-307-5632. Those listening on WOVU, shout out to you. Thank you very much for listening. And we'd like to get your personal or interaction involved in this discussion, because this is all about you, helping you and all of us understand what each other needs and what the city needs and how we can all meet those needs working collaboratively. So if you would, 216-307-5653, text your questions to that. Let me go back to Rosie Palfy and just talk to you a little bit. You know, one of the things that I find out, and I've talked to people all the time about these issues at the barbershop, at the grocery store, back in the day, standing on the street corner. And they say, you know, we call the police when we need the police. We call them when we can't handle what is going on. And especially when there is a mental health episode, we can't handle it. So we call in hopes of getting someone to come and quiet things down, calm that person, give them some perspective, you know, do what they need to do within reason to calm the situation. Rosie, you're thinking on that. And then I want to transition a little bit just after that. And that is to the impact that it's having on police, because police are human beings too. They're not, machines who just walk around and do whatever machines might do. They come from the community. They are the community. Want to get into how all of this is impacting the wellness aspect, mental, emotional, physical aspect of that. But Rosie, if you will first talk to us about, the whole concept.
I didn't understand your question, Harry. I apologize. I had raised my hand because I wanted to respond to a few things other people had said.
Why don't you go do that? Because I asked a lot of questions for one. So respond to what you heard, and we'll go from there.
Okay. First, I wanted to thank Reverend Colvin for what he said, and we would definitely welcome your passion. I invite you to attend the Mental Health Response Advisory Committee meetings, Reverend. The other thing is that we do have 3 great new policies. Crisis intervention team policies. Part of the problem is that it says, the way it's written, that officers should get 8 hours of annual in-service training. And a couple of years ago, the city decided that they could only do 4. After officers, every officer was initially trained in 8 hours of like mental health 101 type training. So because of the other consent decree requirements, they prioritize that over CIT. And so we've only been doing 4 hours of training since then. So one of my concerns is that if an officer gets in a situation where he may be disciplined, when he goes up for his disciplinary hearing and possibly arbitration, they're going to say, hey, this policy said we were going to get 8 hours of training. You're not following the policy. Why do I have to follow the policy? I mean, cumulatively, it's like 12 hours of training they haven't gotten over the last 3 years. The other part is everybody wants to blame this COVID pandemic for what's happening with the lack of officers receiving the 40-hour training. The reality is the department submitted a wonderful, detailed selection plan to the court in August of 2017. And it said that after the plan was approved, we would immediately start trying to, go to the selection phase and vet officers, as well as work on putting together 40-hour training. And so that didn't happen. We didn't finalize the training until 2019. So, to blame it on COVID is a false narrative, in my opinion.
Well, that's why you're here, to give your opinion, and we appreciate that very much. Let's make a transition, if we can, to the impact that being a police officer has on a police officer. Let me just go with Officer Captain Mcpike first, and then I want to get Carol Ballard back into the conversation, and then we'll go from there. Captain Mcpike, talk to us about the impact of being a police officer actually has on a police officer, because you're part and parcel of the rest of us in society.
Wow. Um, I don't think it's unique to police work, but you certainly do see, hear, and experience some things that the general population just doesn't experience, right? And officer wellness is so important to that. Um, I was patrol captain for a couple of years, which means I got to address the new recruits when they graduated and came out to the district. And it was one of the things we talked about. Me personally, I relied on God, my wife, and the occasional martini, I will admit to. But you got to have really good outlets to deal with the stress that you see, right? Not only in police work, but in other things. And statistics don't lie. Police for decades had some of the worst divorce rates in the country and alcoholism rates in the country. And I just think police departments did a really poor job for a very long time on dealing with officer wellness. Well, that's changed a lot in the last 20 years. The Cleveland Division of Police has an employee assistance unit that's staffed with wonderful, caring officers that are available. We've even contracted with outside resources that officers can go to that's available to them for free of charge. Officer wellness is not one of my responsibilities. That's handled by through DC O'Neill's shop with our employee assistant unit and Sergeant Dawson that works over there. But I can tell you the resources that are available now are pretty phenomenal. And we're getting ready to start what's called a peer program within Division of Police, so that an officer can reach out to another officer that's experiencing or going through a traumatic event because they've been there, they've lived it, right? That's been pretty successful in this country. And I'd probably defer to Carol Ballard a little bit on that. I think she's got a lot to talk about on officer wellness as well.
Okay, good. I did call her name and I'm going to call it again now. Thank you very much, Carol Ballard, Director of Training and Education for the Adams Board, the Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board of Cuyahoga County. Thank you. Police are like everybody else. When we have problems, we tend to find a way as best we can sometimes to deal with that. But sometimes we run into mental health issues, we run into alcohol and drug issues, just like anybody else in the community. From your vantage point over at Adams, talk about how that impacts police, and then it impacts on the job they do or not do well or poorly in the community. Ms. Ballard.
So I think it's interesting because a lot of times in CIT training, we meet officers and get that social interaction where they start to describe some of their own mental health issues or mental health issues that are within their family. And I think that through CIT training and in other initiatives like the EAP program that's run by Sergeant Dawson, they're finding some resources that weren't there in 2004 when I first started with them. What I've noticed with officers is the increased amount of stress in the last 5 years, the loss of employees within their department, so their workload is increasing, the morale based upon what they're reading and hearing about police, policies and procedures that are changing, and more stress on the job that, coupled with their own issues that they have at home and other places, is overloaded. But what the bright side is that the EAP program appears to be fairly innovative. They received a grant about 1.5 years ago for police peer support, of which the Adams Board is involved in terms of identifying trainers for that session. And that's a good start, because recognizing and supporting officers wherever they are in the process, because they're employees and you are always advocating for their strength and support every day in the field. And so we recognize that at the Adams Board, and we support their police peer support model. One of the things that we did just recently, we saw when we see opportunities for police training in those areas, we send that to Sergeant Dawson to share with the group that's working slowly but surely on that initiative. And I think as the community, we have to also recognize our role in helping with that stress level and understanding that public service jobs, whether it's police, EMS, or fire, are very, very unusual in terms of the amount of stress and exposure and trauma that goes to those employees. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that, thank you. I know that we call on police, as I said, when we need them most, when people are out of control emotionally, physically, threatening folk, sometimes with bodily harm or death. And it's not easy to walk into a situation like that, gain control without having to sometimes do a heavy hand, but also that heavy hand should be tempered by temperament. And when that happens, we all come out hopefully alive and better for it. Let's go to Alicia Ellis now, who is going to facilitate some of the questions that you have been texting to us. And again, that number is 216-307-5632 for our listeners on radio and anybody else watching. Again, 216-307-5632. Alicia, I'll turn it over to you, let you ask some of the questions folks have been texting to us. And
Thank you so much. Well, this was brought up earlier in the conversation around the low turnout on volunteers for the crisis intervention. And folks want to know, why are police officers not volunteering for the crisis intervention training? And is this a training more volunteer-based rather than mandatory?
All right, Captain Mcpike, I'll go to you if you don't mind and have you answer that, or DC Joellen O'Neill.
Chief, you want me to take it? She's shaking her head, yes. So as part of the consent decree, I told you we revamped CIT, right? And we have a process in place in Cleveland to train officers under CIT, Crisis Intervention Team officers. First, it has to be voluntary. We want officers involved that want to be involved, that have the heart and head for it, right? Just like not every officer is made out to be a SWAT officer, not every officer is made out to be a CITR. We want them to volunteer for it. Two, you got to have.
Let me interrupt there and just ask, sure. Why is it voluntary, since the whole police department is being tapped with either being good or bad or indifferent? Why is it voluntary, not mandatory, that everybody over a period of time get involved? Sure, we want those who have a real interest in wanting to get into crisis intervention training to be a part of it. But isn't there a need for everybody to be a part of it? Wouldn't the community feel better if it were mandated, if everybody had this training?
Well, let me go back a little bit then, Harry. So every Cleveland police, every officer in the state of Ohio goes through 24 hours of mandatory CIT training. That's part of the recruit training. The city of Cleveland adds on an additional 4 hours of training while they're in the academy. And then every year our Cleveland police officers go through crisis and see what we call CIT training. For instance, this year we're doing autism spectrum disorder. Next year the topic is going to be homelessness. So every officer is going through CIT training every year. To become a CIT officer, we want it to be voluntary. We want you to have at least 3 years on the job, because what we're asking you to do is kind of take control of those situations. So we want you to have a little experience under your belt, and we want you to become very familiar with the people in your district that often need our services the most in regards to CIT. If we give everyone that training, it kind of waters it down, whereas we want to specialize it more to 25, 30% of the officers in patrol. Under our current policy, the preference for somebody in crisis is to be handled by a CIT officer. As I said before, we probably had about 400 officers trained under the old program. Not many of those are left back in patrol, probably less than 100. And we started the new program next year. So it's going to take a couple of years to get us built back up again, but we'll definitely get there.
All right, thank you. Deputy Chief O'Neill, your response, and please unmute, since I forgot to do it last time.
Thank you. Yes, some officers are actually better at handling people with certain illnesses, and other officers aren't. So the ones that do volunteer, as Captain Mcpike stated earlier in the conversation, their heart and head are really into it. They want to specialize in that and assist those people. And we will call them out to the runs before we call any other officer. A lot of times people don't understand that we go sometimes from assignment to assignment. So we might be on a high priority, high stressful assignment, and maybe I'm not a specialized CIT officer. And then I receive a CIT assignment which requires me to de-escalate that person, understand their illness, yet I'm just coming off of a stressful assignment and maybe I haven't brought my stress down yet. So the ability to send specialized officers to these crisis assignments actually works out a lot better. We prefer officers volunteer for it so that they're actually into it and they really want to learn. Our whole division, though, is trained yearly. They receive some type of crisis intervention training every year during our in-service. So, and like Captain Mcpike said, it's different topics so that we can kind of hit the spectrum of assisting people.
Thank you. I do know, just as part of human nature, people tend to do best what they like the most. So it's not a problem in terms of understanding the motivation there. We have some other questions. Alicia?
Harry, real quick, before that question, if I could just weigh in on the training. So I think we've heard from different people about how it works, but there's multiple tiers to it. The baseline tier is that everybody at the Cleveland Division of Police does receive crisis intervention training. There is a certain subset of officers who receive specialized training. Those folks are volunteers, but supervisors and field training officers also receive that specialized 40+ hour training. So I just want to be really clear that folks understand there is universal training, and then those who really want to engage in this space volunteer and become specialized in this type of training and interaction.
Thank you for that clarification. That's important.
Can I please add something?
Just one question. 1 second. Is there anybody, I want to get to you. Yes, go ahead and I'll ask if there's anybody else who want to respond to this particular question, and then we'll go back to Alicia. But briefly, if you could, Ms.
So several things. The consent decree actually calls for officers to get specialized training. We are lucky in that we have Dr. DuPont on the monitoring team. He's like the premier subject matter expert. He helped co-create the Memphis model. It was the first crisis intervention team training model in the country. And I believe it was in 1988. And when we started this process 5 years ago, my mindset from being a veteran was, hey, train everybody. Training's always good. And then when I sat through a few hours of training, I realized that some people weren't paying attention. These are small classes where you can only have 25 people going through it. And a subject matter expert was telling us that this is special training for special officers. So you want people to volunteer for this. The other thing is, really quick, is that the consent decree has had some unintended consequences, if you will. And officers that I've talked to, some of them are afraid to volunteer for anything because they're worried about getting disciplined. So that's one of the things that I've heard as far as the challenges for recruiting. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anybody else who wants to respond to this very briefly, we'll then go on to other questions. I want to give you an opportunity if you want to chime in. Anybody else?
Sorry, I think I will jump in on this one. Indeed, what I think the goal here, indeed, as it was pointed out, was to get a basic level. And that basic level, though, is something on the order of 47 hours now throughout the consent decree for all officers. That's been an impressive thing. And what I really like is the feedback we're getting from the officers about how impressive they find that training and how they all like it across the board. I think the idea that we're trying to also develop a cadre of officers that want to go beyond and do even more has been made pretty clear. And I think that's really true. And you can see that with these officers. They, interestingly enough, though, provide a role model for younger officers. They often become field training officers. They often get promoted. As you heard Captain Mcpike mention, there's only even 100 left of what they started with, because they identify themselves and they're self-identifying as officers that really want to take an extra step. So I think, again, that it is doing well. I think I'm actually pleased what's happened with the volunteerism. Initially, there was a slow response, but as officers began to hear about the training, as they began to meet individuals that are running these programs, they began to decide this is the real thing and I'm going to be part of it. It's not just a lip service to something, it's a meaningful job. So I think it's made a difference and I am pleased with the progress.
And coming from you, sir, I appreciate that very much. Let's go back to Alicia now and for an additional question. Alicia, are you ready?
Yes, thank you. Do we have an accurate total number of officers who are specialized crisis intervention trained officers? And then, and the second part of that question is there a plan to increase the number of officers who receive the training?
Captain O'Neill, I guess that may come to you. Deputy Chief O'Neill.
Yes, that's Captain Mcpike can actually answer that. So Captain, correct me if I'm wrong. Right now, since we've just started the specialized training, the first session we had was in October. So that was 19, actually 21, because the captain and the sergeant went through it. But I want to clarify that only 25 people can go through that class. So that's a small amount to go through a class, to become a specialized CIT officer. And the instructors, the majority of them are actually volunteers from the community. So we can't offer that class every week. We can actually only offer it 3 to 4 times a year when the Adams board, who actually essentially sets up the class for us because they get all the volunteers, can offer the class to us, because the Adams board also trains all the other agencies in Cuyahoga County with the 40 hours training. So we were supposed to have a class during the NFL draft. We had to cancel that. So by the end of this year, we hope to have 100 officers trained. But like I said, it's 40 hours given by volunteers. We can't expect them to train us, come in and train every week. It becomes too much. They also have jobs that they answer to.
Quick question before you mute yourself, and that is, how are these police cars and squad cars and these runs staffed? Do you have a police officer with a CRT specialist, or is there a situation then the dispatcher says, send me a CRT specialist? How does that work?
So if a call comes into the communication center and the dispatcher is aware that CIT officer should respond to it just by questions that are asked, they will send the dispatcher will send the CIT officer. Our communication center has a list of officers that are actually certified as specialized CIT officers, so they know who's working that day and who they should send.
All right, thank you very much. Go ahead.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you. Back to Alicia and more questions. Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you. Will there a mental health response advisory committee continue this work after the conclusion of the consent decree? If so, who will oversee, and then what will the funding be supported in this work?
Was that directed to any particular person?
No, it was not.
Okay, then let's go back to, I guess, Captain Mcpike, since it is a police question, and then anybody else who wants to join in that conversation, we'd welcome your input. Captain.
Yeah, thank you. The Cleveland Division of Police is absolutely committed to MRAC. If the consent decree were to end tomorrow, that's not going to change. In fact, one of the tasks for MRAC this year is we're going to start creating bylaws. We're going to start creating rules for MRAC. We're going to start formalizing it. What does that look like? Because right now there are no bylaws. We operate similar to like a board and many of the organizations in our community, but we have no rules that tell us what does membership look like? How do we recruit? And as part of that, we want to recruit even more. So as we go through this process of creating bylaws and formalizing the structure of MRAC, we want to expand our membership, and we want to reach out to even more community partners to help us with it. So yes, we're absolutely committed to MRAC.
Thank you. Dr. Colvin, your thinking on this, we haven't heard from you in a while, and I'd like to get your thinking on this whole process of making sure folks are ready, trained, willing, and able to do what needs to be done when the occasion occurs.
I will, but Ms. Ballard actually had her hand raised, and so if she would reply, then I'll follow up behind her, if that's okay.
That's fine. I didn't see it, but Ms. Ballard, Carol Ballard, by all means, from Adams Board.
So on behalf of the Adams Board, you mentioned about the future of MRAC. The Adams Board is uniquely and very much committed to the continuation of the Mental Health Advisory Committee, because it serves as one of our anchors in building and expanding our crisis response system. We couldn't do this work without the Cleveland Division of Police. We are the behavioral health funder for crisis services throughout Cuyahoga County. So it helps inform our work expand our work, and create new opportunities throughout Cleveland and Cuyahoga County overall. And so I just wanted to say that because our administrator, Scott Osicki, has often reiterated his ongoing commitment to this work. And he is the one of the tri-chairs for our MRAC committee, along with Commissioner Nicole Carlton from EMS. So this is a partnership that was formed under different circumstances, but it has been an ongoing commitment towards change in Cuyahoga County. So thank you.
Thank you. Again, the number to text your questions, area code 216-307-5632. Again, 216-307-5632. And let's go now, if you could, to Reverend Dr. Jawanta Colvin of the Olivet Institutional Baptist Church for your response and our comments, sir.
Yeah, a couple of observations. And again, I'm not as well informed on these issues in terms of the consent decree and its details and its expectations as some, though I will say that Greater Cleveland congregations, of which I am a member, 80% of the work that we did in terms of recommendations are included in the consent decree. I will say this, that it's really important as we talk about the number of people that have been trained and continue to engage in ongoing training as relates to crisis intervention. I think it's really important to recognize that the community in which the policing takes place is a community in crisis. And so when we think about crisis intervention as only in these incidents or in these, or pair it off to only think about it in a very narrow sense, we miss out in recognizing the context in which our officers do serve. Poverty, gun violence, gang violence, the level of challenges with respect to basic city services or basic social services. So the communities in which our officers are serving are communities in crisis. So therefore, every interaction that they are having is a crisis intervention to some level. Low grade, maybe not the level of intensity, and maybe that is not what necessarily precipitated the call. But when you understand the context in which you're serving, you are already dealing with a person who is living in crisis. They are in a space socioeconomically, existentially, that already raises their level of anxiety, their level of mistrust, their level of isolation. An officer has to know that. Now, let me say this with respect to our officers, because as you notice, as I've observed as it relates to some of our unfortunate encounters with our officers and individuals, that we're talking about two human beings. And human beings our bodies have evolved over hundreds and thousands, even millions of years. We can handle a level of stress. There is a level of resilience in the human body system. But a lot of our officers and people in our community don't know the difference between stress and distress. And because they cannot necessarily understand where they are on the spectrum of dealing with managing stress, but being in a place of distress where you yourself need intervention, whether that's mental health intervention, sitting down with a counselor, taking some time off, learning how to manage your own psyche as well as your own soul and all of these things. So what you end up having is communities in which the community at large and the police community were people who are triggered by their own traumas, right? And that's exacerbated by people operating out of any number of fight or flight instincts that rise to the fore that cause unfortunate encounters. And so we've got to begin to think about our communities, the community within the police, as well as our community at large, as traumatized communities in which if people are not understanding the level to which they themselves are being triggered by things that this incident only percolates and exacerbates, then what ends up happening is we get more of these unfortunate incidents and are not really dealing with the root cause of why we're having, unfortunately, more of these unfortunate encounters with people in crisis and our police officers. So I'm sure there are psychologists and therapists and people on this panel can talk much more deeply about that, but that's just an observation.
And it's an important one. I want to ask one follow-up with you, and that is, how important is cultural competence to this equation?
Oh, it's absolutely critical. It's so critical that this is why diversity is so important. Think about this. If you have a room of 99 men and you have one woman, think about the level of insecurity, the level of challenge, of understanding her needs or her concerns, and her concern about whether she can feel safe. Well, you think about that not only as it relates to gender balance, but also as it relates to racial balance. It is so important that people be able to relate to people that not only look like them, but also can empathize with them. And so the ability to exercise empathy, not just cultural, see, it's not just cultural competence here. You got to have the capacity for empathy. That's what happened in the situation, unfortunately, to go this far, in the situation with George Floyd. That officer lost his empathy. He did not see the humanity in George Floyd, and as a result, he lost his own humanity. And so it's our inability to recognize and to bridge our common humanity that oftentimes causes us to dehumanize one another. And so, I see Ms. Ballard shaking her head. She probably could talk a little bit more about this. But so if I could pass the baton, I'm gonna pass it to her.
All right, Ms. Ballard, if you will, and then Ms. Palfy had her hand up. So Carol Ballard, if you would give us a brief response, and then Ms. Palfy.
I have to say, Reverend, preach that. He's preaching it tonight. Trauma. The Black community is a traumatized community across this country. And so it's historic trauma. And so he's correct in saying that when we see a car, we naturally go back to whatever that traumatized event was, whether we saw it, whether we heard about it, because we're being overexposed to it through the media, through friends, through the neighborhood every single day. And so there's been a lot of aggressive recruitment across the country, particularly in Cleveland, to find and develop a more diverse police department because they're starting to recognize that. I have the unique pleasure in working with a lot of different police departments, and I see that happening in the suburbs as well. Muslim officers, women officers, transgender officers. 18 years ago, I would have never seen that, but I see it at a much larger level. And we are a traumatized community, and we need that level of empathy from those that serve us or respond to us and serve us in order to feel safe. Because when you're traumatized, you never feel safe. You always feel uncertain. You're always ready for that next boot to drop. And the officer could be the best communicator ever without realizing that we're already we're terrified, absolutely terrified, because we don't know what's going to happen because of that history behind us. And it's not about cultural competency. It's about the awareness of where that generation of historical trauma is coming from. And I believe, and I think I heard Chief Williams talk about this in the last series, where he talked about the recruitment efforts and the work of Officer Leon and other departments and what they were doing. And so I was really impressed with that, because when you start to hear it across the country, everybody picks up on it. So thank you for letting me respond, but I preach it to me, Rev.
All right, thank you. Now I see a hand.
You said I was going to be next,
Yes,
Mr. Boomer.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. So a couple things. I'm glad to hear Ms. Ballard bring up trauma in the Black community. The city of Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, and the Alcohol, Drug, Mental Health Board of Cuyahoga County last year all declared racism as a public health crisis. Good for them. My concern is, in 5.5 years, we have never had a meaningful discussion about what happened with the Tanisha Anderson case. And I've always made it clear that it is not about blaming any police officers involved, that it's about looking at what happened and preventing a future tragedy. So as far as I'm concerned, when people want to talk about trauma in minority communities or racism as a public health crisis, how do you ignore this? The other thing is, there was a question about whether or not MRAC was going to be permanent. It's my understanding that City Council would have to pass a resolution, or somehow it would have to be in the charter for it to be permanent, that bylaws wouldn't do that. And the other thing I want to point out is the way the consent decree is written. It listed a list of groups or organizations that the city should seek membership from. And the Alcohol, Drug, Mental Health Board of Cuyahoga County was one of them. So instead, what they've done is they signed a memorandum of understanding giving them the power to run this committee. So instead of being an equal member like everybody else, the Adams Board funds almost every agency where we have representatives on this committee. So it's actually had a chilling effect. Are there ways that it's helpful? Yes. The Adams Board should be extremely involved in diversion activities and the crisis intervention training. But this is the city's committee, and they need to step up. They need to assign more employees to help. We've never had a public information officer come to a meeting. I've been asking for years if the community engagement officers are going to be involved in any way, and I've never gotten any answers. So
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate your enthusiasm and your passion on that. And the Adams Board, I believe, is uniquely qualified to be as involved as it is. But again, thank you. Deputy Chief Joellen O'Neill, your hand has been up, and thank you very much for your wanting to chime in.
I just wanted to go back and talk a little quickly about what Reverend Colvin stated about stress and de-stress and how that relates to our officer wellness. A couple of things, programs that we do are yoga programs and mindfulness programs, which actually is teaching our officers how to de-stress themselves, either at home before they come to work or even while at work. So if I'm in a high stressful incident and I have to move on, before I move on, we call it 4x4 breathing. I know the military does it. They do it in yoga classes. So part of our officer wellness is actually dealing with our officer stress and how we can de-stress ourselves to better serve our community. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you for that. I want to go back to the questions from our audience, those who are watching via the internet and those who are listening via WOVU, and see if there's another question or two as time is running out. So Alicia, if there is another that you'd like to put on the table, this would be the time to do it.
Yes, sir. Thank you again. Great questions this evening from the community. One is, what can grassroots organizations do to help educate and assist with the consent decree?
All right, let's see here. Captain Mcpike, I guess. Well, let me just go to someone I haven't talked to in a minute, and that is Bridget Brennan. You may not be the actual person to answer this most adeptly, but I'd like to get your thoughts on it anyway. So if you could, just your thoughts on that question.
Yeah, I would encourage anybody who is interested in being part of this process to raise their hand by reaching out to the what we call the MRAC, reach out to the Adams Board, reach out to the Division of Police, and say that they would like to be part of this conversation and make room for themselves at the table. I think that's very important. And the whole purpose behind the MRAC is to bring together just a very diverse group of people who are interested in facilitating crisis intervention models and working to serve that community, the mental health crisis community, well, and in a way that is going to help the division of police. So I encourage people to get involved.
Captain McPike, if I could get you to offer your thoughts on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I think the Division of Police has a lot of avenues now to ensure community involvement. You know, one is and DC O'Neill can speak more, there's the Cleveland Police Commission, which also helps reach out to the community. We have MRAC as she suggested. Harry, the people involved in setting this up, United Way and NAACP, they have my email address. I'm the CIT coordinator. I'm one of the tri-chairs of MRAC. Please feel free to share my contact information with any organization that wants to hear from us.
Thank you.
I said earlier, as we revamp and restructure MRAC this year and create bylaws, part of that discussion is membership. So it's possible we even will be reaching out to some of these organizations this year.
Thank you for that. In the interest of time, I want to give each of you maybe about a minute, if I could, to give us your closing thoughts on why this whole thing is important. And let's just go ahead and start with Dr. DuPont, and then we'll go around the table. About 30, 40 seconds, if you will, in your closing thoughts.
Well, I heard two things that stand out to me, and I think that capture what's important about the consent decree. The first is the level of community involvement that's occurring in a lot of areas. As Captain McPike mentioned, that we have, in addition to the MRAC, we have the CPC and others groups that are very much a part of what's happening. I think that's outstanding. And the other thing I think is what indeed I heard from Reverend Colvin, which is the idea that we're struggling with a community that has had a difficult time and been traumatized. And the need to help that recovery is really paramount. And that's what I look, and I think why it's exciting to have the Adams Board involved with the police department, because they bring that kind of expertise and really have the expertise to help make some of that happen. So I want to thank all of you. And the last thing I'd like to add too is that, folks, the volunteers don't charge the police department. They're probably donating the equivalent of $15,000 to $30,000 every set of trainings for CIT to without charge. And that kind of thing is impressive to me. I found the volunteerism in this city to be something that's really worthy of note, and I'm impressed with the civic pride people bring. So thank you for that, Harry. I appreciate what y'all have done here with this tonight.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your involvement, and we look forward to your continued involvement. Let's go to next, Dr. Colvin, your closing thoughts, sir.
I'll be very brief. There's a quote that I'd like to share with you all, and that is, "We cannot fix yesterday, but we can create tomorrow."
Very impactful. I appreciate it. Rosie, your closing thought, briefly.
Yes, I want to thank everybody for allowing me to be part of this event. 5 years ago, we talked about opening a crisis center for individuals in crisis where it had universal access, no wrong door approach. Somebody could refer themselves there. And the county just opened a diversion center, which is a great first start, but the majority of people aren't going to jail, they're going to the hospital. And so we need to find a way to divert people from the hospital. And that is a testament to the work that the Cleveland Division of Police is doing. Also, I want to thank all the work of the Adams Board. We would be where we are without their help.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Carol Ballard from the Adams Board, why don't you do the closing? I think you're the only one that hasn't said something in terms of conclusion.
So I want to thank United Way and the NAACP for putting this conversation together. We need to do this every year just to kind of update each other, not only when we're in a consent decree environment, but as part of having ongoing community conversations, because I think that they're very effective. And I will close by saying, we cannot fix yesterday, but we can improve tomorrow and thereafter. And so I look forward to the continued progress and relationship with everyone. Thank you.
You're on mute, brother.
Thank you, sir. Got caught again. But thank you very much, everybody, for your participation. See, that's one DC brother to another DC brother helping me out. I appreciate it. Thank you. We were in DC together at the same time. We didn't know each other there, but it's good to see you. The other thing is I want to thank everybody for your participation, your involvement through the years, and your continued involvement. I want to thank the United Way, the NAACP, all the other folk involved, WOVU, Channel 19, Cleveland19.com, all those who helped facilitate this. And now let's go to Augie Napoli of the United Way, president, for his closing thoughts. And Augie, good to see you. And thank you again for helping to facilitate this series of conversations.
Well, thank you so much, Harry. Really appreciate what a wonderful discussion it was this evening. And I can't thank our panelists enough. It's very interesting, and our audience. Thank you for being with us this evening. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our sponsors once again, Cuyahoga Community College and Rockwell Automation, as well as all of our community partners for helping bring this important conversation to life. We're deeply grateful. And again, I want to thank each and every one of our audience members for joining us on our mission to create a voice, to encourage engagement, and to advance our understanding of the situation and of each other. Our next segment will be coming up on May 12th, when Rick Jackson, senior host and producer at WVIZ PBS and WCPN FM, will moderate a discussion on families and community building resilience. We have watched sometimes helplessly as members of our families and communities have been taken from us by violent behaviors, including police interactions. Cleveland families and communities impacted by such trauma have found diverse ways to react to these traumatic events. Some running for elected office, some advocating for new legislation, some creating foundations, and some establishing neighborhood watch programs are only just a few of the steps some have taken. And we're going to hear more about this. June's Community Conversations, Families and Community Building Resilience, will be an opportunity to share experiences and emotions, identify individual and community support systems, and discuss one's capacity to give back when facing enormous loss. Please join us by registering through our website at unitedwaycleveland.org. And a final thank you to Harry, to our partner, the NAACP, and to all of our panelists and audience for being with us this evening. Thank you.
Augie, thank you very much. And again, my appreciation to all who have been involved in bringing this, the 5th of 11 conversations and a series of conversations with the community. These discussions are important. They change lives, both for the citizens and for the police. If each of us rededicates ourselves, and then if we can each one teach one and bring somebody else along, reach back and pull up, we all grow together. And I want to encourage each of us to use our sphere of influence as well as our Rolodex, as it were, and bring families and friends and community along with us. That way, all of us will be better for it. All of us will be better served. And I appreciate the opportunity to have been a part of this. Thanks to the United Way and the NAACP. All please have a great and safe evening and stay COVID-19 free.